Okay, we're at the bottom of the hour, and I just want to welcome everyone to day 2 of the 2025 Teaching and Learning Conference. We're so glad you joined us. This is a highly anticipated presentation. It's going to be informative, but it's also going to be fun. So we're so glad you're here. The Art of Personalized Engagement, Unpacking UAGC's Individually Relevant Standard. By joining us today, you acknowledge that this session is being recorded and will be shared with TLC-related materials. Microphones will be muted for this presentation, but we do encourage you to post feedback and questions in the chat. I will be monitoring it as well as members of the panel, so we hope to get to everyone. About 10 minutes before the session is open, and then our panelists will have some closing remarks. So we have enabled live transcription. All you have to do, if you'd like to use it, is look at the bottom of your Zoom screen and you'll see Show Captions. Click that. And you'll be good to go. So I'm pleased to introduce you to the panel, and Dr. Harper, take it away.
Well, hi, everyone. To kick off our session, we'd like to introduce you to 5 instructors, Yasmin, Dina, Karen, Sadie, and Yolanda, who are chatting informally on a video call. Yasmin begins, I just finished reading through the new Standard Instructional Expectations document, or SIE as they call it. This whole individually relevant thing is just a euphemism for individualized. And I don't have time for that. I'm supposed to craft these unique, personalized responses for students who I know are just using AI to write their posts in the first place. It feels like a colossal waste of time to me.
A waste of time? Yasmin, I think it's the opposite. I wonder if the new SIEs are rigorous enough. Shouldn't we be posting individualized responses to every student in every discussion, no matter the class size? How else will they know we see them as individuals? We need to foster a real culture of care. 4 students over 2 days? That's barely scratching the surface, but then again, realistically, I don't have time to post to every student.
Look, I'm fine with individually relevant as long as it's efficient. I have a whole bank of feedback stems and research citations that I recycle. I just tweak them a little bit to connect to something the student says. It meets the minimum expectations, shows I'm monitoring their progress, and saves me hours. Work smarter, not harder.
This whole debate feels like administrative micromanagement of my teaching. I teach at 3 other universities. You know what their policy is? Grade the assignments by the end of the term. That's it. No mandated announcements, no required number of discussion posts, no checking in on students who miss a week. As long as the grade book is done by finals week, we've fulfilled our contract. This obsession with regular and substantive interaction is just administrative overreach. I work hard to connect with students and help them learn, regardless of what the contract says.
Oh, I hear you, Sadie. Making sure students feel seen is important. But how do I make everyone in a class of 40 to 50 students feel seen in introductions and provide individually relevant feedback on all those discussions and assignments? You want me to identify strengths and areas for improvement for each one? That's too much. Now, don't get me wrong, I want to give useful feedback, but the time commitment is insane.
Oh, y'all crack me up. Okay, everyone, let's take a deep breath. The SIEs were developed by faculty for faculty to give us both clarity and flexibility. Individually relevant doesn't mean writing a novel for every student. It means connecting with them. Ask a question, share a quick story, point them to a resource. The goal is to be present and engaging and not to burn ourselves out. We do the best we can. And if you're struggling with a big class or a tricky situation, the expectations are clear. Communicate with your program leadership. They are there to help. Now, who wants to talk about something really stressful, like what we're going to have for lunch?
Oh, man, I was thinking
so
about that.
hungry.
Oh my God, I want
Order
tacos.
Chinese
So-
food today.
Yeah, and nothing with artificial colors
I
and
agree with
flavors. And no, okay, everyone. I see our perspectives on lunch are as unique as our perspectives on individual relevance. But Juliana is right. Let's take a breath and see what the SIE panelists have to say about the art of personalized engagement. Now, before we jump into it, though, we realize that the personalities and views of our faculty are even more diverse than represented by the 5 characters in our skit. Therefore, we'd like, before we share our perspectives on individual relevance, we'd love you to share what individually relevant means to you. You can respond by scanning the QR code or typing slido.com into your browser and engaging or with us so that everybody can see your responses on the big screen anonymously, or you can type your responses in the chat. So we'll just give a little time for people to add to the comments. Lots of great comments coming in, specific and connected to students' work. Students get what they need. Adding relevant material to the conversation, sharing some professional insight, connecting with each student based on their individual understanding and performance. Response matches the content in the post. Connects to rubrics and learning outcomes, addresses strengths and weaknesses. Again, we see connection a lot. Fantastic. So thank you all for sharing. And as now we're handed over to Yvonne, who's going to share some important contextual information.
Oh, come off mute, Yvonne.
Let's take a moment to talk about how this all happened. As we started to even think about what needed to happen with our peer reviews, our IQRs, SIEs, whatever anyone knows, that the Faculty Senate put together an IQR ad hoc committee. So this was a combination of not only faculty leadership, but also working with shared governance, working with our staff and other colleagues to help make this come to fruition. We started out with meeting weekly, and we're still meeting weekly for the most part. But we also kept in mind what the accreditation standards were. We didn't just start writing and everyone putting their opinions down. It's really important to kind of keep that in mind. So we wanted to align instructional expectations with evolving standards, including DOE's, Department of Education's emphasis on regular and substantive interaction. We kept in mind also the culture of care, that we looked at embedding empathy, presence, advocacy, responsiveness into our instructional practice to support student well-being and engagement, and of course, student and classroom excellence. We wanted to promote high-impact teaching strategies that were not only sustainable but also scalable, while honoring the very diverse needs of our learners. Then being very intentional in our dialogue, our iterative feedback, and a shared vision for instructional quality. And this initiative reflects our collective dedication to meaningful, personalized engagement in every classroom. And one thing I think is also very important for me to mention here is that we consistently reached out when we would come up with the draft and what we consider to be a close to final draft. We reached out to faculty. We put a survey out there to all full-time and associate faculty for their feedback, for their thoughts very early in this process. And we carefully and very seriously took all of their feedback and looked at them very individualized. We provided a theme. What were some of the things that were coming out of these surveys? So this was not just these group of people that you see here, but there were a whole group of faculty, all of the faculty that responded, and we had a great response for this too. And then once we completed this, then we moved on to our next step, which I think was also critical, and that is working with academic leadership for them to review and provide their feedback and going back to the table and making any necessary or edits that were important at this particular point.
Thank you, Yvonne. Now, these 3 questions directly connect to our objectives for today's session, including UAGC's interpretation of individually relevant, strategies for the online classroom, and examples from different disciplines and class sizes. And now let's officially meet all of our presenters for today. I'm Yolanda Harper, Program Chair and Professor in Applied Behavior Sciences. And you've heard from Yvonne Lozano.
I'm Yvonne Lozano. I'm sorry. I'm Yvonne Lozano. I'm the Associate Dean and Professor of the Division of Health and Behavioral Sciences, the College of Professional Advancement.
Hi, everyone. I'm Deborah Carpenter, Assistant Professor working in the Division of Education Professors and a proud member of the SIE IQR Committee.
Hello, everyone. I'm Susan Gould. I'm Department Head of the Department of Financial Operations Professions, and I'm an assistant professor, and we reside within the College of Professional Advancement.
Hello, everyone. I am Cara Metz. I'm Department Head and Professor in the Department of Human and Behavioral Performance Professions.
So let's take a look at the meaning that we have operationalized for individually relevant. In our document and in our FAQ throughout the university, individually relevant means directly related to each student's academic work, demonstrates monitoring of students' progress towards learning outcomes, and further expands each student's learning. As mentioned already, this term aligns with what the Department of Education deems as representative of substantive feedback. Again, relating directly to the student's written content. So why didn't we choose to use the term substantive feedback in our new documents? The intended impact was to ensure that faculty are engaging with students throughout every interaction in individualized, personal, meaningful ways. And by taking the term individually relevant, we can successfully socialize it in a way where that word individual is always on the minds of our faculty. We wanted to make sure that we could enhance clarity with this new term because let's be honest, there are a lot of faculty that we engage with who wonder about the ambiguous term substantive. Does that mean more? Does that mean info dump? What does it mean to be substantive? So in terms of, this is the intended impact. In terms of flexibility, looking at that next point, we want to ensure that faculty understand that being individually relevant does not mean that you are sharing overly lengthy responses, that you are reinventing the wheel, which with each and every course you teach. We are faculty and our stories are our stories. We come with a unique set of experiences and stories from the field that we should feel empowered to share over and over. However, being individually relevant means to connect our experiences and our responses with the very personal, individual contributions that our students are making. So in this session today, we're going to talk about some strategies, including embedded feedback, but also the use of customized feedback stems and connecting with students so that our faculty can all feel comfortable and confident being individually relevant, however, also efficient with the realistic time constraints that they have. Next slide. So if we were to unpack the key attributes of being individually relevant, I want to call your attention to the image in the upper right-hand corner. That image is going to follow our slides throughout the presentation. As you are thinking as an instructor about engaging with your students, you want to stay away from being cookie cutter. Our students are not the same. Their contributions are not the same. So our interactions and our responses should not be the same. So think about the bold-faced terms on this slide. Responding to their original academic work, thinking about each student's strengths and gaps, which should differ from interaction to interaction. You want to be steering your faculty towards the learning outcomes. What is it that they are supposed to be doing, whether it's a discussion, a journal, or an assignment? Relating to grading rubric criteria and demonstrating in your response that you've truly read and considered and responded directly to each student's work. Lastly, it's important that we as instructors are evaluating our students' progress toward achieving mastery and giving those action items that are going to help them move in that direction.
All right. Of course, our UAGC SIE are aligned with Department of Ed requirements, and it's now part of our standard practice. But more importantly, individually relevant interactions are high quality and high impact online teaching strategies that are backed by research. The theoretical basis for the standard instructional expectations comes from the community of inquiry framework, Moore's model of interaction for online learning, and universal design for learning. Research has shown that instructor presence from the community of inquiry framework and learner to instructor interaction from Moore's model are associated with better student outcomes, which really is what we all want. Research has also shown that universal design for learning strategies increases engagement and achievement. And the SIE focus on quality interactions aligns with the engagement component of UDL. Next slide.
Thank you, Susan. Now, without further ado, let's get into some classroom examples. I'll start with showing a few brief responses to students from course introduction forums. And these are key components I frequently draw upon to make the post individually relevant. So in this first example, the student shared a vague career goal of wanting to work in social work. So the National Association of Social Workers website, which provides descriptions of different types of social work, was provided. Here's another example of a student being directed to a website to help them clarify their understanding of careers that they've mentioned in their and appear to have confused in their introduction. Here we have two follow-up questions, first asking about their career goals, and second, a question that acts as a subtle challenge to something they wrote in their post that demonstrated absolutistic thinking, where they wrote, in all contexts, critical thinking moves beyond decision making, or beyond emotion and narrow perspectives, etc., as you see on the screen. So the follow-up question is intended to prompt reflection on when emotions enhance or impede critical thinking and problem solving. Students also appreciate badges and images. Here, in addition to asking the personalized follow-up question, since the students shared their military status, I included a thank you for your service badge corresponding to their branch, and I have them prepared for all branches of service. And then this student shared that they just had a baby. So in addition to the text that was targeted to what they wrote, I also shared the badge to celebrate with them. Yvonne.
Thank you, Yolanda. So for me, I really do appreciate, and in the classroom and even in personal life and my work life, I think connecting with individuals can go a long way. And I think that I believe that it starts, I know that it starts in the introduction when you're in the classroom with the student. So that first introduction from you to the student and acknowledging their presence, acknowledging something different or special about them really helps us to go a long way. So this is an example of a post your introduction form that I've used. You see there, obviously, the obvious is that hi everyone, I'm Professor Lozano, and I'm so glad you're here. So you can imagine what that I'm so glad you're here would feel like for the student. It's very welcoming, it's engaging, it's opening the door for them to come into this world that you are getting ready to spend the next 5 or 6 weeks with them. I tell them where I'm from. They start making connections that way. Some will say, I'm from Texas, or I used to go to Texas, or I was in the military and lived in San Antonio for a while. And I tell them how long I've been teaching online. Not that that maybe would mean anything to them, but instead of saying I've been teaching online for 5 minutes, I can say I've been teaching online for 15 years. And also express to them that I know that things can get busy. I know that you're trying to manage a little thing. And yes, that is my Diego for anybody asking. Here, they're having a pizza at our table at our home. Someone just asked that. I see you, I'm here to support you, and I'm here every step of the way, opening that dialogue to make them feel somewhat welcoming. Everyone will have their own way of posting this introduction form. This is just something that I use. It's a way for you to also focus on how important it is to individually connect. Just kind of a show and tell moment. I showed a picture of my favorite Zoom companion, which is my cat, Diego, who always curls up next to me if I let him, when I'm grading or prepping for class. And he also is a reminder for me, because he sleeps 17 hours a day, to take a break and breathe. And so when I see him sleeping, I'm like, oh, maybe it's a good time for me to take a nap. And so I'm letting the students know this. So I'll have students send me pictures of their pets, send me pictures of their kids or where they're at. And then I also tell them, now it's your turn. I want to hear from you. Let's build this community and start to learn a little bit about one another, where you're from, one thing that motivates you to keep going, because I'm going to remember that. I'm going to remember what that student wrote when I start to see that maybe they're not as motivated. And then something that brings that photo, that brings their life into this next 5 weeks or 6 weeks of their educational experience, and something that also brings them joy, that helps them to stay focused on what they're doing. All ways for me to connect with them some way. But I've also shared too. And so I let them also know that I'll be replying to their posts. I'll be asking questions, keeping the conversation going. And I also can't wait to hear more about them. So this already, that my arms are open. I'm there to hear them. I'm there for them. And that I'm not a robot in this classroom, that I'm a real person with a real life. And I want to hear about their lives as well. Thank you.
When I do my introduction posts, I like to create videos for each student. I like to form a connection to show them that I'm not just fingers on a keyboard, but I'm a real person who is reading what they're writing. Sometimes this connection even elicits students creating a video in response to my video, which I think is really exciting. And when I create videos for students, I open up a Word document and I will type out what I want to say, and then I'll make a recording. I found it goes way faster this way. I tried not to prepare a script and I just fumble through it all. So I find I really need a good script, but this also helps for accessibility because I post them into YouTube. And although YouTube is getting way better, I don't know if you have created a video recently, but they do punctuation and capitalization. It is not 100% accurate, but it is by far some of the best transcription that I have found. But I usually just copy and paste the little script that I created. My videos are between 30 seconds to a minute and a half. I always find one thing to connect with students on, and I ask them one question. Yvonne, you mentioned that you put where you live. I found a student who grew up in Dayton, Ohio. I was like, oh, I grew up in Dayton. I was like, I grew up in Huber Heights, and so did she. And we still connect to this day, just from that one small connection that we made. So I really find that creating videos, and it often doesn't take long. It's in the first week, so I don't have a lot of grading to do too. I find this is a really effective way to start to make those connections and build trust with students.
Okay, so this is another example. This is now in a academic topical discussion forum. And in this discussion forum, the students each pick a publicly traded company and evaluate its dividend policy. So I don't show you the student post, but I do have the reply here, which meets the SIE standards. And also notice that it's not particularly long. It's, 2 short paragraphs. The bullets at the bottom are color-coded to show you the connection between the SIE and this post. So the purple parts are the individualization. So I'm greeting the student by name and addressing the student picked Pepsi. And I don't just say like, oh, I'm glad you picked Pepsi. I find some facts about Pepsi that engages more with the company that they've already demonstrated an interest in. And then progressing through providing additional questions to guide them to think further about the topic and how their company and what they're thinking about in this post relates to progressing their learning in the course. And then finally, just a very minor point, you'll notice that there's an APA in-text citation with the reference at the bottom. And it takes a little bit of practice, but once you get into the habit, it's great to model that for students so that they get comfortable seeing and including their own APA references.
So I'd like to take a moment to focus on the individual connection. This is an example of an instructor's beginning to a student named Pamela. And the highlighted elements are those that relate directly to what Pamela has said in her post. Notice that the reply feature is activated. When you use that drop-down reply, it engages students outside of the classroom and lets them know with a notification your instructor has responded to you, thus increasing the likelihood they will come back in and engage. But notice that the instructor has connected with something that they said in the post that lends itself as a nice bridge to the beginning of intellectual elaboration. Then again, the instructor references a question that the student asked, something that they are curious about knowing, and so this leads to a nice prelude to the remainder of the response so that the instructor has an opportunity to not be cookie cutter in sharing a story, but first connecting how it is relevant to what the student has said. So an individually relevant connection is what draws the student into the conversation. They are seen, they feel valued. You can consider leading with this as a best practice, but that individual connection doesn't have to be at the beginning. It can be something that sums up the connection in response to the student.
Thank you, Debbie. Now, here I've included a few examples from colleagues who teach courses that have a lot of quantitative content to show what individually relevant might look like in some of these courses. So while this example first one would be stronger if a follow-up question were included, the post is still individually relevant in pointing out how rounding the way this student did can make the results less accurate. This example does include a question challenging the student to figure out the percentile rank based on a specific set of a specific Z-score. And in this particular example, the instructor responds to the student's comments about the numbers not making sense and to an observation of the student rounding to the nearest 100,000 and discusses the impact of rounding in different contexts. When engaging students in the discussion forum, you'll see many of the same elements I shared regarding the Post Your Introduction forum with expansions illustrating heightened instructor presence. And while there are several items on this list, the abbreviated summary is acknowledge the student and something they shared, share academic and career relevant content connected to the course learning objectives using different methods, sometimes videos, infographics, dramatic scenarios, always, in my case, always, followed by critical thinking and problem-solving questions. I intentionally frequently create longer posts to encourage reading and deeper thought because many of the university students do score below average on proficiency profile measures of critical reading skills. And the best way to improve reading skills is to read more. The key, though, is making the content engaging so that the students will actually read it. And since these examples are longer, let's see what they look like in Canvas. So in this first example, as Debbie shared, you see the tagging of the student, their name, and also an invitation for other students in the class to join the conversation, an engaging clickbait title. And then in blue italicized font, we have quotes from things the students wrote in their particular post. In this particular one, I shared a personal anecdote, and then followed by some scholarly research. And then we kind of move into the extension of the learning. Again, we have big, bold, and highlighted the clickbait title to engage students. And in this, a rhyming jingle, an image, all of this catches people's attention as they're scrolling down the page, just figuring out who they want to respond to. And then in this particular case, the dialogue is a debate between a visionary leader passionate about their proposal and a researcher calling out critical thinking fallacies and insisting on the need for data-driven decision making. Followed then by a prompt to explain why controlling for placebo effects and avoiding data snooping in research are important for the scenario on the topic the student wrote about. And then the sources, as Susan shared. Now, this example from Leadership and Ethics course, actually, I'm skipping ahead. So this example shows a similar format, but the difference is that 4 students are tagged in the post because all of them wrote about trafficking. 3 wrote about human trafficking, and 1 wrote about animal trafficking. And while this post only counts as 1 post, it does allow me to connect with more students, especially in larger classes. Students also see how their topics are connected. I still included quotes from all 4 students that are tagged in the post. I still cite some research, and then share a couple of videos related to the different types of trafficking the students wrote about. We've got our clickbait title up here to draw other students into the conversation. And then here the scenario is briefer, but it relates to, again, an interconnection among the types of trafficking that the students wrote about. So in this particular one, they have an interagency team that must work together to address the intertwined exploitation of both humans and animals. And then again, the post concludes with some critical thinking questions connected to content the students wrote about, the topic, and the course learning objectives. This example, again, we see similar format here. Sometimes I do use badges when their posts are really above and beyond. I want to acknowledge that as well. And again, another clickbait title. And here the prompt and the scenario encourage students to look at how will leaders respond to this particular crisis from their unique perspectives. Again, a critical thinking question. And finally, these images are just excerpted from posts, but they just show how dialogue images can be used to provide feedback. The earlier examples showed the use of the blue italicized font to highlight what students wrote. As an alternative, the impact of what the student wrote here is illustrated in the dialogue images in the fictitious client that the student wrote about. So in the first example, an outdated version of a test was recommended. I could have just written in text, you recommended the MMPI, there's a more recent version. But instead, I put the feedback in the dialogue in context so that the student can kind of see and reflect on the impact of, recommended an outdated test. First, the client has brought to your attention that you've recommended an old test to them. You tell us how you're going to respond to their question now, and then also tell us how new test differs from the older test. In this particular example, the student is asked to reply to a client because recommendations that they gave to the client were very, very vague. So I could say, your recommendations are vague. Can please be more specific? But in this case, again, the dialogue image is used to provide the feedback. Here, the student gave a vague interpretation. In this particular case, exactly what the student wrote is shared, and then what happened as that information was translated outside of the session. And not only this particular kind of scenario that has been like extended and kind of blown up, prompt the student to rethink how they might have shared the information, but it also invokes issues related to confidentiality because they don't have permission to talk to Nancy's husband, who calls the office irate. So then they have to reflect on thinking again about what they say at a deeper level. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint now, and we'll hear from Yvonne.
I think, when I see all of these wonderful examples, I'm just so proud to be a part of UAGC and this body of faculty and their commitment to student success. And just hear great ideas. I'm just trying to also take notes at the same time as if I haven't seen this presentation before, but I just wanted to acknowledge that. When I think about my own discussion facilitation, I think of how it's evolved. I think about how it's evolved away from cookie cutter, with an attempt to really just be there and present, be able to connect to the student. And it's not going to work the same way every single time. What works for one class, what works for one group of students may not work for others. And every student may need something different. But what I try to also keep in mind, particularly when I was teaching gerontology or courses in aging, when I teach anything, especially in healthcare, was how fast and sudden everything changes in regards to policy and changes within the industry itself and the workforce industry. I think the experience that I bring to the table in this as a subject matter expert is essential. And so, but I also, as a subject matter expert, want to share with the students what's going on, what's happening now today. Something will help connect them to the outside world and the specific topic in which we are learning for that time. So I really am not doing this as much as I would like to. I'm actually, after meeting with this group weekly and starting to talk about best practices, this is one thing that has come to mind for me in order to keep the student kind of current with changes within the industry, whatever industry that you're teaching. So in this, I'm asking the students, how might they be influenced in the interest in the field of gerontology or healthcare or education, whatever it might be. So I asked them to kind of give me an idea of what their opinion are regarding the aspect of aging that they're most curious about, because that also helps me to connect with the student. And then I can seek from them, what do they know now about these particular topics, whether it's cognitive health and dementia, aging in place, intergenerational relationships, global aging trends, end-of-life care, and ethics. So when the student starts to talk about things, well, this really, aging in the workforce really sounds exciting to me. What can I do in this field? Tell me a little bit more about what you used to do. It helps me to pull something out of them that really is important to them that they've started to think about. And the other exciting thing about this, maybe this is the first time they're actually going to start thinking about any of these things. So these just gives them a nudge. If they say, I'm not interested in any of this, then it'd be, of course, a challenge for me and my responsibility and my excitement to come to them and say, well, what are you thinking about? What do you see that's not on here that you would like to see? The poll, also, I like that because it's quick and easy for them. You put this out there, they hit a button and it pops up, and then we can share. We have 50% of the class that's interested in cognitive health and dementia, and others are 20% in global aging trends, and even end of care and ethics, 20% of the course. So it helps them to see where others are heading, where they're going. And then also, more importantly for me in this field, what can I now do with it if I'm interested in cognitive health and dementia? What are the title? What are those jobs that I can be a part of? You can already start to kind of hear my brain going as I start to think about these students and how they report this and how they report it in a poll, and how I can start to really engage them and get them excited about the career choices that they're making and what they can do in that field. and what those titles sound like, and help them kind of research that themselves. So it really does help to really engage them in the discussion and make them feel special and connected to the field in which they have chosen.
Great.
Thank you.
All right, I am giving another example of a discussion post that I have given to a student as a response. I have also color coded. I used Susan's great idea. So I always make sure that I am addressing the student specifically. I always try to make sure I acknowledge something positive that the student does in their post. Some students, like, everything is positive. Others, I might be picking and choosing. And if I'm teaching a subject that I'm really passionate about, I really have to reel myself in with my discussion posts. So you can see how I've connected in two places to what the student has said. I've connected what they've said to something that happens in real life. And so this person was talking about making the cost of services available to anybody who comes in. And I talked about a policy that is put in place that requires hospitals to have price transparency. And what a great idea for everybody to have this if they're in any human services field. And then I ask so many questions because I just want students to engage. I want them to think about it more deeply. So here I've asked two questions. One is a specific question, while at the end I might just ask, what do you think about that? Or why do you think this is happening? I try to include a reference. I don't get to it in every post because some things just come from my own experience, while other things, maybe I've had an experience with it or I have knowledge about something. And goodness, I would love to connect that back with something that's been researched. And the other way that sometimes I add in references is if a student writes something and I get really giddy about whatever they're writing about, I go and check out their references and read them, so then I can reply back to what they're also reading to maybe help them expand their ideas about what they've just read. And then I put down at the bottom, it was 159 words, right? It doesn't have to be a very long post to be engaging or individually relevant. And I will use resources, again, if it's the same class, because there are some subjects, there's just so much you can talk about. But again, I always try to find that connection with what the student is talking about and making it individually relevant for them.
Okay, and then moving over to assignments as opposed to discussions. So assignments where students submit their work product. This is an example for a final project that has two components, a quantitative component and a qualitative component. And we thought this would be a good case because it's important that both components get individually relevant feedback. Go ahead to the next slide. So in this slide, you can see that the instructor, which is me, has highlighted some of the quantitative numbers, and then the comments are specifically elaborating on the formulas or the calculations. So it's not just saying this number's wrong or this answer is wrong, but it's providing sort of that feedback on where they maybe got off track in the calculations. And even though in a final project there may be some repetition or common errors, there's also shockingly a lot of variety in different ways that these answers can be wrong. So it still applies to be individually relevant because one student may be struggling with percentages and others, doing the math of percentages, and others might be struggling with the actual concept of the financial term, the definition, the equation for the CAPM or something like that. And so it's important to provide that feedback. And you can see that the whole focus of this individually relevant stuff is that it ties back to monitoring the student's progress on their achievement of the learning objectives. So the learning objective for this course specifically talks about developing pro forma projections. And so this assignment addresses that learning objective, and through this feedback, the student is getting very specific information on how they're doing towards that learning objective. And then within the rubric, because it has different components for quantitative and then the paper, which is part 2, I can direct the student from the rubric to my comments in the quantitative part. So that creates that direct feedback and that connection and path for the student from the rubric to their individual work and to their learning outcomes. Go on to the next one. And then getting to the paper, and in this case, and in a lot of cases with quantitative courses, the write-up is connected to the quantitative analysis. And so in the feedback, it's important to acknowledge what the strength or what the student did well, the positive aspects. And in this situation, there's an acknowledgement that while some of the calculations weren't entirely correct, overall, the process that the student followed was correct, and that the instructor, which again was me, gave them credit for following the quantitative process, even if the actual calculations had minor errors in them. So that aligns with the SIE. And then within the rubric, not everything has to be an inline comment on the document. I provided some feedback to the students specifically related to how they wrote about financial performance. And it's hard to see because it's small, but in this case, the student was talking about a set of projections and wrote it as if, it happened in the past. So it said the revenues in 2024 were X, the revenues increased in 2025 to Y, and increased again in 2026 to Z. And of course, 2025 and 2026 haven't happened yet. And that's important for a couple of reasons. One, because from a professional real world perspective, if that kind of writing appeared in a financial professional setting, it would be a huge red flag. And also because the fact that I'm giving that feedback on that to correct that writing, it really demonstrates that the instructor has read and specifically considered this student's individual work and is responding to the unique way that the student addressed the assignment. Go on to the next one. So then this is just a summary. Again, 2 components, both had feedback that was individually relevant, met the SIE, demonstrated monitoring of the learning progress, provided highlights of the student's strength, and reflected the instructor's actual evidence of reading the student's work and responding directly to that student's work.
So let's talk a moment about discussion feedback. As you know, with the new standard instructional expectations, instructors are expected to share comments for any area of a rubric where students fall below distinguished or below perfect. So if you look at these 2 examples, Samantha earned a perfect score on her discussion. So the feedback stem or the verbiage is reflecting a student who did everything right, earning distinguished in all areas. So you'll see the green color coding is where the instructor really made sure to identify those elements of the discussion expectation that the student met all 4 perfect scores. The instructor can then take the same feedback stem and customize it tailor it so that it meets the needs of D, who's the second student listed there, who fell a bit short in her content and critical thinking scores, and also didn't participate in her response to peers. So you can see how with a few adjustments, the instructor can then take and tailor down the distinguished verbiage so that it can then apply. This allows all of that feedback for discussions to be individually relevant, yet also customized and tailored to each student's specific post. Next slide, please. One challenge for instructors who are evaluating PowerPoint presentations is that often they're also evaluating whether there is audio narration, so they have to look at them outside of the Waypoint application. So one way that an instructor can ensure that feedback is individually relevant and also directing students toward mastery of the learning outcomes is to create kind of a list of all of the things that a student would need to do potentially perfectly or at distinguished level, and what that verbiage would look like. So if you look on the left-hand side, the verbiage to Elise is verbiage representing that she has met at a distinguished level every element of that PowerPoint expectation. Then on the right, you can see that the instructor started with the same feedback stem, started with that same verbiage, but then went item by item and customized it to reflect what Cara has done. Not only does this ensure that Cara receives the individually relevant feedback that she needs to move forward and where she fell short, it is also an excellent way for an instructor to stay up to date on exactly what do I need to be evaluating for this PowerPoint assignment, making sure that that feedback stays closely tied to the learning outcomes for the PowerPoint.
Thank you, Debbie. And just kind of alerting all panelists, we're at 10 minutes. We have 10 minutes left, so we'll move through the next few slides quickly so that we can open it up for questions. So we do have an interactive activity for you to kind of scan through these examples and share with us in the chat. Write down the numbers of the examples you think are individually relevant. So if you think all three are individually relevant, type 1, 2, 3 in the chat. If you think only one example is individually relevant, type that answer. And we'll give you just a few seconds because we do want to make sure we have time for Q&A and the closing remarks. And if someone could tell me what people are writing in the chat, that would be helpful. Kind of move forward. So 2 and 3 are individually relevant. And what about these? And you can just kind of scan through them and just share what you think. And if you recognize this music, also put that in the chat. I know we didn't give you a lot of time to read through these, but if you were inclined to think 5 and 6 were individually relevant, then yay!
I'll just go through this very quickly. I wanted to demonstrate a few different ways that I give individually relevant feedback. Typically in the feedback summary, I actually don't give a lot of feedback. I might tell them great job, connect it to their topic, but then I usually say see rubric, if it's a discussion post, or see paper for more information. And so with discussions, if I am rating a student anything below distinguished, I will write specifically on the rubric. I give them some kudos for what they did, but talk about how they can improve their post. And then again, I told you I geek out a little bit with the topics that I teach. So sometimes I get really into feedback and talking and connecting with students in the paper, but that's a way that I make things individually relevant, where I might ask questions if maybe a student isn't right on the mark, like how can this be improved? If I see something that they're doing really good, I will tell them, but also maybe just connect it to something in real life. So these are a few of the examples of the feedback that I give in papers. And then, like I said, the summary feedback is usually pretty short because everything that I write aligns with what is in the rubric and what's in the assignment.
Thank you. So we have time to take a couple of questions here. So if someone would help with monitoring the chat to see if there's any questions. We also would love if you have any personal examples of individual relevance that you use. Feel free to share those in the chat as well.
And Dr. Harper, I've been monitoring lots of great positive feedback, and you've really demonstrated your desire and passion for engaging students in the classroom. This has been a very engaging presentation and very informative.
Thank you, Harla. Are there any questions? Do you see any questions that we?
There is one. It says, what do we foresee will be the toughest challenge with providing individually relevant feedback?
Well, since you read it, would you like to lead off answering it?
I think figuring out what individually relevant feedback means to you. So we gave a lot of examples, and these are how we do it, but it's not the only way to do it. And sometimes I will tell you that I take too much time doing feedback. And so knowing your time constraints, and then it might take some time to develop some of those stems so that all you're having to do is maybe kind of fill in those stems. But once you get those down, you might figure out how to make this work for you.
Great answer. And I'll just say one of the reasons we were intentional in the use of individually relevant, because there are some assignments that we grade, like the one I showed earlier, recommending the MMPI 2 when there's an MMPI 3, that many students make the same error. And so you don't, if out of a class of 30, 8 students make the same error, but the rest of their post is pretty much spot on, you don't have to come up with 8 ways to give the same feedback. So you can say it the same way for those 8 students and be individually relevant in those cases. But usually still, then you've provided something else individualized in your post to respond to them.
I just want to say something real quick. I think it's also hard to remove ourselves as faculty from our library of comments and feedback. So it's just kind of pushing that off to the side and starting fresh and creating some new feedback. As Yolanda said, you can use certain feedback for up to 8 students, so keeping that in mind as well, and removing from the cookie cutter if you can.
Yeah. And my example was if they made exactly the same error. So they recommended the MMPI 2 when they should have recommended the MMPI 3. Something. Then you don't have to come up with 8 different ways. I will kind of go through these. I probably will skip mine because I think Harla has some closing remarks as well. But anybody else who wants to share as your slide comes up, we've got some student feedback examples, why it matters, and what individual relevance is about. So,
yeah, in my closing remarks, I just wanted to share that some of those small personal touches that I put into classrooms and individually relevant feedback they go noticed by students. And so I just wanted to give some reactions that I've had from students to encourage you to figure out how being individually relevant and genuine in your own classroom will help to impact students in a positive way.
And of course, if you're viewing the recording, you can always pause and look at these slides in more depth.
I just wanted to add to what Cara said, that If you are not quite ready to try video response, consider audio response. Jotting down a couple of notes from a student's introduction and then responding with a recorded video of your audio of your voice helps students connect to you in a personal way and hear your warmth and hear your enthusiasm. I have students say, "No one's ever done that for me before. Thank you. This seems like a really caring place to be." And if we are also underscoring the culture of care in our classrooms, being individually relevant does relate to culture of care and helps our students feel valued and cared about. No cookie cutter, guys. No cookie cutter.
Really quick, I just want to mention this is not a really quick story, but I have a student who we connected very strongly with. We both loved the New York Yankees. He was having a very difficult time in the class at the very beginning. He was almost obstinate and sometimes very critical. But once he found out that I also love the Yankees, we started to send each other texts and personal emails regarding the games that were going on. And he connected to me real quickly. And as a matter of fact, he went from not doing very, very well at the beginning, and he was very successful and made an A in the course. And I think because he felt that personal commitment. So that's a short version of that. So.
And again, more student comments. Again, if you're viewing the recording, feel free to pause and review them if you like. But just words like fun, engaging, making the class feel less like a grind and more like a space to grow from students. And in this particular, we often think about Bloom's in terms of cognitive verbs, but also there's the affective domain. And in closing, I'll leave you with an acronym for individually relevant engagement: connect to student content, apply expertise, reflect via dialogue and feedback, and engage with artistry and integrity. And we don't have time for this one, but thank you all for attending. And I believe Carla or someone is going to